Taking time away from his family. He's going to stick around for about 20 more minutes and answer questions from y'all. So if you have any questions, if you would raise your hand, I'll come to you. For those of you that are a little bit older, it'll be Phil Donahue style. I'll run out to you and I'll bring you the mic and you can ask the question. That way we can get it on the recording. Dr. Strauss will be able to hear you. So if you have a question, raise your hand and then we will do an open forum. Here we go.
Okay, first of all, I love that you're doing this. I've taught high school physics and chemistry and junior high, and I teach a lot of these things to my kids, which is awesome. And I think it's something that needs to be out there. But the question that I always get that I wasn't really sure how to answer, and I'm sure you can much better, couldn't we have evolved to be something other than a carbon-based life form? Couldn't we have evolved to meet another set of parameters besides the anthropic principles?
Yeah. So in this universe, if you want to have, well, in any universe, if you want to have life, you need to be able to store information, which is what our DNA does. So if you look at this universe and say, what's the possibilities for storing the information? What biologists will tell us is that, and chemists will tell us, is that you have to do it somehow in molecules, and you have to make some kind of long chain of molecules. So it turns out that there are very few elements that can make long chains. Carbon is basically the only one. Silicon can make semi-long chains, but probably not enough to really have any kind of life, even bacterial life, unless you watch Star Trek where they have the silicon-based Horta. But other than that, silicon is probably not, and then the only other possibility is, I think boron is the same place in the periodic table, and boron is very, very rare in the universe. So most biologists believe that any life form has to be carbon-based, simply because you need to create some mechanism for storing information. And as soon as you say it's carbon, and the only other possibilities are a few other possible molecules or possible atoms, which most people think aren't really viable options. And so as soon as you know it's carbon-based, you know the chemistry, and you start to have really constrained parameters. And so within the parameters of this universe, I haven't seen any other viable life possibility other than carbon-based life. Yeah. There was a question over here.
So you said our sun was a third-generation star. I think you said 45 billion years old. How does that play or not play into the popular Christian belief that we have a young Earth?
Yeah, so the universe, according to the observations from science, is about 14 billion years old. The sun is about 4.5 billion years old. And the idea that the universe is young, which some Christians believe, in fact, I grew up in that tradition, comes from two things from the Bible. For those of you who don't care about what the Bible says, you're here for the science, just bear with me for 5 minutes or something. All right, so it comes from two ideas, that the genealogies in the Bible are complete and that the days of Genesis are 24 hours. And both those are poor assumptions. The genealogies are not complete. You can see that by comparing Matthew's genealogy to Chronicles, by comparing Luke's genealogy to Genesis. We know the genealogies aren't complete. That's why even some young Earth creationists push the date back to 10,000 years rather than 6,000. And the days of creation are not necessarily 24 hours. In fact, I believe that the best understanding of the days of creation are that they aren't 24 hours. One of the best scholars of ancient Hebrew in the 20th century was a guy named Gleason Archer. And Gleason Archer, who was an evangelical Christian, wrote in his book, A Brief Introduction of Old Testament Survey, that when he looks at the context of Genesis 1, it's apparent that the writer could not have meant the days of Genesis to be, the days of creation to be 24 hours. So ancient Hebrew has no word for era or epoch. If you wanted to write that the universe was created in 6 periods of time, you would use the Hebrew word yom, which is translated day, because there isn't a better word. So old Earth creationists like myself, who believe God created the universe from the Big Bang, have different understandings of Genesis, but the majority is that the days of creation are 6 days of long periods of time. And actually, it fits in better. I've got a lot of theological training, and I could argue that that fits in better with the story in Genesis and with what the rest of the Bible talks about. But that's a much bigger subject than we're going to talk about now. But it's still a biblical idea. It's been a biblical idea actually for millennium, that the days of creation are not 24 hours. Okay? All right, there's a question way in the back.
I was going to ask, so if the evidence for God is based in this concept of many finely tuned parameters, could that then be applied to the notions of evolution that one of the main arguments against evolution, I know this is going more towards biology, is that it's too many coincidences of mutations and evolutionarily beneficial things. So could those also be parameters God finely tuned, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm not arguing for or against evolution. Whether the age of the universe and the Big Bang and the question of evolution are two totally separate issues, actually. And I haven't said anything about evolution. There are certainly Christians who believe in what's called theistic evolution, that God used evolution to create humans. There are other Christians who have other ideas about the viability of evolution. And so, yeah, I mean, God is pretty powerful. He can do whatever he wants. And if he wanted to use evolution to create humans, he certainly could. And I'm not going to tell you what I believe about that right now. Unless you ask me a question, then I will. Okay. Other questions? Yeah, the one's right up here. Go ahead and ask it, and then I'll repeat it.
I read
Or,
somewhere
go
on
ahead.
the internet about CERN doing an empirical study trying to determine if the dark energy forces somehow aid and abet the expansion of the universe, and is there some sort of like a balance between the repulsive gravity that would cause the universe to expand and the attractive gravity that would hold the planets together? What came out of that experiment?
Yeah, so his question is about an experiment at CERN that was looking at the effect of what we call dark energy. Dark energy is a very strange phenomenon in the universe. We discovered it about 10 years ago. We have no clue what it is. As I said in my talk, as the universe expands, everything is attracted to everything else by gravity. So it should be slowing down as it expands, like if you were to throw two balls apart, but they were connected by a rubber band. Because they were attracted to each other, they would eventually slow down. But the universe isn't slowing down as it expands, it's actually speeding up as it expands. And nobody has a clue why. We call that, whatever is causing it, dark energy, but we have no clue what it is. So there's a lot of experiments that are going on to try to understand dark energy. So far, there's nothing that we can really say definitively at all. All we can see is the result of dark energy, that the expansion of the universe is accelerating, but we have no clue what it is, in spite of some experiments that have been done. Okay? Okay? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Two things. Dr. Walter Brown, he shows, because he used to be an evolutionist and old Earth and everything, but when he was designing the lunar lander and that, and they did the study on the dust of the moon, and when they found out there wasn't 40 foot, there was only about an inch, then they recalculated and came back to a very young moon, like about 8,000 years. And then there's the other experiment about the change of the magnetic pole. You know, the magnetism, it drops in half by every 1,500 years. Yeah. And that also shows that if you go back too far, well, white hot like 10,000 years, then this would be a magnetic star with no existence of life.
So what this gentleman is bringing up, I don't know if this is really the appropriate forum to talk about it, but you brought it up. So he's talking about what the Christians who believe the universe is 6,000 to 10,000 years give supposed scientific evidence to support that, and he's bringing up two of those. The dust on the moon one, it came about, a scientist sent a balloon up in the atmosphere to measure the rate of dust falling in the atmosphere. And he measured it incorrectly. He retracted the paper 6 months later. And young Earth creationists have been using it as evidence ever since, even though he retracted the paper. If you really do the experiment right, and you ask how much dust should be on the moon, if the moon is 4.5 billion years old, you get about a half of an inch. If the moon is 4.5 billion years old, with the real experiment done correctly. And that's exactly what we see. Same with the magnetic field. We know the magnetic field of the Earth changes rapidly because it flips its sign every 400,000 years. So you expect it to change rapidly. It's exactly what you would expect if the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So I can take almost every piece of scientific evidence that young Earth creationists use to try to support their view and show you that it's either misrepresented or sometimes plain wrong. And it kind of pains me because many Christians are reading this without the real knowledge behind it and accepting it as fact and then repeating it, and it's really poor science. It's easily refutable. And so both of those quote pieces of evidence are unfortunately easily refutable by someone who knows the facts. And so there really isn't any scientific evidence for a young Earth, despite what you will read on certain websites. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi. I really enjoyed your talk. And I guess I'm kind of wondering this question about the nature of science. And it seems like there's always going to be kind of an edge of science, right? And I'm sure you've thought about this. There's always going to be something we don't know that we haven't discovered yet in science. And in the future, probably we will know something about that and have some scientific explanation for it. Just like, before we understood the laws of gravity, we didn't really know what was happening with those. And so, at that time we ascribed, perhaps, I'm not sure what people thought, but you implied in your talk that people ascribed, that God was like causing an apple to fall, and it wasn't perhaps gravity. But then after we figured out that it was something about how different masses attract to one another, then we realized that's gravity. And so in the future, do you think that if someone were to give a talk like yours, they would have to kind of shift again and get to that other point where we don't really know anything and talk about those things that we don't know about,
So
and that being where God
This is a great question. Let me infer something from what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong. But you're referring actually to an argument for God that's often called the God of the gaps. And the argument goes like this. There are things we don't understand about nature. So therefore, those are the things God must have done. And then when we understand them about nature, we don't need God anymore. And that's called the God of the gaps argument. And so then if I gave this talk in 100 years, would I only be talking about the things we don't understand? And that's called a God of the gaps argument, that you're arguing that what things we don't understand imply there's a God. And I actually abhor the God of the gaps argument because I think it's a poor argument. And the reason is because then when you find answers, then there's no room for God. But another reason why I don't like the God of the gaps argument is because I am a Christian, I believe the Bible, and the Bible doesn't have a God of the gaps argument. The Bible, when it looks at nature, it says that the things in nature that the ancient people understood, those were still things that God controlled. Not the things they didn't understand, but the things they did. In other words, the Bible says that God feeds lions. But ancient people knew how lions were fed, right? They weren't that naive, okay? And so if you notice, my arguments, except for the origin of the universe, which nobody knows, my arguments aren't based on what we don't understand, but actually what we do understand. We understand how carbon is formed. We understand how the mass density of the universe was created. We understand the strong nuclear force to some extent. That's what I spent 30 years of my life trying to understand anyway, right? And so what I'm saying is it's actually the things we do understand that seem to point to a God. And so if I come back in 100 years, my guess is we'll understand these things better, just like a year ago we understood the formation of carbon better because we understood how the light quarks were involved in it, which we didn't understand 20 years ago. And that new understanding supports what I believe about God. So I'm not looking for God in the gaps. I'm looking for God in what I do understand about nature. And that's a very different kind of argument. People have accused me of having a God of the gaps argument, but it's not, except for the origin. The origin is a gap that nobody knows, And some transcendent cause had to bring it about. And so God, to me, seems the best unknown transcendent cause. But most of the arguments are not gap arguments. They're arguments not from not knowing, but from actually knowing. But it's a great question. Yeah, and the talk would look different, but I think it'd be better because we'd have more knowledge. Right here, maybe? And then there's a couple in the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Are you claiming that Christian theism predicts more than M theory, or that theism in general predicts more than M theory?
I think M theory predicts nothing. Right? Because M theory predicts everything, and everything is nothing. Right? If I tell you that I'm going to do something after the talk tonight, then I've told you nothing. I'm going to do something after the talk tonight. Right? Because I've told you I can do anything. And so that's what that quote was, that a theory that predicts everything predicts nothing. Again, I'd love to find M theory. I'm not knocking M theory. I win a Nobel Prize if I find evidence for M theory. I think it'd be great. It would answer the questions that I've spent my life asking. What's the structure of the universe? But to say that M theory makes predictions about what we should expect to see in the universe is not science, and it's not a prediction. So that's what I'm saying about M theory. Okay?
Yeah. Why does it matter that God exists?
Well, if it's the Christian God, it matters significantly, because the Christian worldview is that God cares about humans. He wants a relationship with humans. And it's not just an abstract idea about whether God exists or not. The Christian worldview is that the most fulfilling, satisfying life you can have on earth and for eternity is having a relationship with this personal God who exists. And so many of the things I brought up tonight only partially lead to the Christian God. They lead maybe to other issues. You'd have to do more investigation to determine that the Christian God is correct God. But that answer is tremendously significant because it affects your satisfaction in life now, your purpose in life now, and it might even affect your eternity. So why don't we maybe take the last two questions back there, and then we can call it a night, and then I'll stick around if you have other questions beyond that maybe.
I've got a question that doesn't really relate to science, but possibly you could help us with. I have a trouble all semester trying to find a Christian professor within my specific major and within my specific college, I guess you can say, that has a Christian worldview. I'm an anthropology major, and so in all of my classes I'm told that I evolved from apes and then Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How would I find professors that share the Christian worldview that can explain the science behind what they believe in a Christian way?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't have an answer. I don't know the professors at Texas Tech. I will say, let's talk a little bit more about evolution. It's the second question about it. There are Christians who believe in the Bible as God's word, who believe evolution happened. It's called theistic evolution. The Catholic Church is on record, and they believe in God, saying that the method that God used to create our physical bodies was a guided evolution, theistic evolution. So evolution in and of itself is neither anti-Christian or anti-biblical. So you could find a Christian anthropologist who would believe that, not that we evolved from apes, nobody believes that we and apes share a common ancestor, right? So simply because they believe in evolution is not, doesn't tell anything necessarily about their Christian worldview. But there are other Christians who have different ideas about how God created our human bodies. So I don't have an answer for you. I would recommend a book by Dennis Alexander. It's called Creation or Evolution, Do We Have to Choose? I don't agree with everything he says, but it's a good book to get Christians thinking. And then I think what you said is a good question, is to continue to ask your professors what the solid evidence is for common descent. There is evidence. That's why many people believe in evolution. But I think the strength of the evidence can be highly discussed. And I think what you should do, what I would want my students to do, is ask honest questions about why we in our field have come to the conclusions we have in particle physics, would be my field. And I think any graduate student or any student, it's legitimate to ask in an honest way, why have we come to these conclusions and how strong is the evidence? And then see what the answers are, and then decide for yourself how strong the evidence is. I mean, the great part about being a Christian is that the issue isn't predetermined. For a naturalist, the issue is predetermined. Richard Dawkins wrote, evolution is true whether it happened or not, or something like that. Because he has no other options. There is no God. A Christian who believes in God, all you're looking for is the method God used. It could be evolution, it could be something else. So you're much more equipped to find the truth, because you have all options available to you. And I think theistic evolution is a viable option.
This guy up here. We'll do the last one, and then after that, if you have questions, you can talk to.
Yeah, I'll stick around as long as you want.
Hi, Dr. Strauss.
Hello.
Hey, I had lunch with you today, and you mentioned a quantum vacuum, and right after that is when my head exploded.
All right.
I do have one quick question. You mentioned Stephen Hawking. He was quoted recently talking about the God particle. And I'm not sure what that is, but he says if we discover it, life will cease to exist. So I'd like to know what it is. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, we have discovered it, actually. My name is on the paper that discovered it, actually. It was discovered in 2012. The CERN Large Hadron Collider discovered it. Two collaborations discovered it. Each collaboration has about 3,500 names. So my name is one of the 7,000 physicists that discovered it, all right? It was named the God particle because a Nobel Prize winner named Leon Lederman wanted to write a book about it and the search for the Higgs boson. It was named after a guy named Peter Higgs. It's a particle called a boson. I won't explain what that means, but so it's the Higgs boson or the Higgs particle. And Leon Lederman's publisher, when Leon Lederman wanted to write a book about it, said, you can't call the book The Search for the Higgs Boson because nobody will buy it. So his publisher had him name it the God particle. And other than the name of the book, it really has no meaning as a God particle. Basically, so it was a ploy to sell books. It's one of the many subatomic particles that we have looked for and discovered in particle physics. It has tremendous implications in our understanding of the universe, in the stability of the universe, and how mass is formed in the universe. It's not going to affect your life on a daily basis, probably. It does affect my life on a daily basis, because that's what I study. But the name God particle was simply a publisher ploy to sell books. And we discovered it. It hasn't changed the universe. Well, it's changed my universe a lot. And it's been a great discovery. It was a huge effort and a huge accomplishment. But it really is another one of these things that, for me, the more I learn about the universe, the more I see remarkable, intricate design in it. And even the mass of the Higgs particle, which may give us further insight into the universe, opens up a bunch of questions. And it really makes it fun to try to study this universe. I have a friend who's an artist, and what he says is when you look at a piece of art, you see the soul of the artist. And as a particle physicist who gets to look at Higgs bosons and quarks and things like that, I kind of feel like I get an insight into the soul of the artist who made it all. And it's really kind of a privilege to do that research. So thank you for coming tonight. If you have further questions, I will stick around for a little while longer.